Neville Goddard, The Law and the Promise. 1961. Read by Josiah Brandt. Chapter 9. Enter into. If the spectator would enter into these images in his imagination, approaching them on the fiery chariot of his contemplative thought, if he could make a friend and companion of one of these images of wonder, which always entreats him to leave mortal things as he must know, then would he arise from his grave. Then would he meet the Lord in the air, and then he would be happy. Blake. Imagination, it seems, will do nothing that we wish until we enter into the image of the wish fulfilled. Does not this entering into the image of the wish fulfilled resemble Blake's void outside of existence, which, if entered into, englobes itself and becomes a womb? Is this not the true interpretation of the mythical story of Adam and Eve? Man and his emanation. Are not man's dreams of fancy his emanation, his Eve, in whom he plants himself in all her nerves, just as a husbandman his mold, and she becomes his dwelling place, and garden fruitful 70-fold? William Blake, The Mental Traveler. The secret of creation is the secret of imagining. First desiring, and then assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled, until the dream of fancy, the void outside existence, is entered and englobes itself and becomes a womb, a dwelling place, a garden fruitful 70-fold. Note well that Blake urges us to enter into these images. This entering into the image makes it englobe itself and become a womb. Man, by entering a state, impregnates it and causes it to create what the union implies. Blake tells us that these images are shadowy to those who dwell not in them. They are mere possibilities. But to those who enter into them, they seem the only substances. On my way to the West Coast, I stopped in Chicago to spend the day with friends. The host was recovering from a severe illness, and his doctor advised him to move to a one-story house. Acting upon the doctor's advice, he had purchased a one-story house suited to his needs. But now he was confronted with the fact that there seemed to be no buyer for his large 3-story home. When I arrived, he was very discouraged. In trying to explain the law of constructive imagining to my host and his wife, I told them the story of a very prominent New York woman who had come to see me concerning the rental of her apartment. She maintained a lovely city apartment and a country home, but it was absolutely essential that she rent her apartment if she and her family were to spend the summer at their country home. This is also listed in The Power of Awareness, Chapter 23, Case Histories Number 5 by Neville Goddard. In previous years, the apartment had been rented without any difficulty early in the spring, but at the time she came to see me, the season for summer sublets was seemingly over. Although the apartment had been in the hands of good real estate agents, no one had seemed interested in renting it. I told her what to do in her imagination. She did it, and in less than 24 hours, her apartment was rented. I explained how she, by the constructive use of her imagination, had rented her apartment. At my suggestion, before she went to sleep that night in her apartment in the city, she imagined she was lying in her bed in her country home. In her imagination, she viewed the world from the country house rather than from the city apartment. She smelled the fresh country air. She made this so real that she actually drifted off to sleep, feeling she was in the country. That was on a Thursday night. At 9 o'clock, the following Saturday morning, she phoned me from her country home and told me that on Friday, a highly desirable tenant who met all of her requirements not only rented her apartment, but rented it on the one condition that he could move in that very day. I suggested to my friends that they build an imaginal structure as this woman had done, and that was to sleep, imagining they were physically present in their new home, feeling they had sold their old home. I explained to them the wide difference between thinking of the image of their new house and thinking from the image of their new house. Thinking of it is a confession that they are not in it. Thinking from it is proof that they are in it. Entering into the image would give substance to the image. Their physical occupancy of the new house would follow automatically. I explained that what the world looks like depends entirely on where man is when he makes his observation. And man, being all imagination, must be where he is in imagination. This concept of causation disturbed them, but it smacked of magic or superstition. Yet they promised they would try it. I left that night for California, and the following evening the conductor on the train in which I was traveling handed me a telegram. It read, "House sold, midnight last." 1 week later, they wrote and told me that the very night I left Chicago, they fell asleep physically in the old house, but mentally in the new house, viewing the world from the new home, imagining how things would sound if this were true. They were awakened that very night from their sleep to be told the house was sold. Not until the image is entered, until Eve is known, does the event burst upon the world. The wish fulfilled must be conceived in the imagination of man before the event can evolve out of what Blake calls the void. Again, I suggested to my friends that they build an imaginal structure as this woman had done, and that was to sleep, imagining they were physically present in their new home, feeling they had sold their old home. I explained to them the wide difference between thinking of the image of their new house and thinking from the image of their new house. Thinking of it is a confession that they are not in it. Thinking from it is proof that they are in it. Entering into the image would give substance to that image. Their physical occupancy of the new house would follow automatically. I explained that what the world looks like depends entirely on where man is when he makes his observation. And man, being all imagination, must be where he is in imagination. This concept of causation disturbed them, for it smacked of magic or superstition. Yet they promised they would try it. I left that night for California, and the following evening the conductor on the train in which I was traveling handed me a telegram. It read, "House sold, midnight last." 1 week later they wrote and told me that the very night I left Chicago, they fell asleep, physically in the old house, but mentally in the new, viewing the world from the new home, imagining how things would sound if this were true. They were awakened that very night from their sleep to be told the house was sold. Not until the image is entered, until Eve is known, does the event burst upon the world. The wish fulfilled must be conceived in the imagination of man before the event can evolve out of what Blake calls the void. This next story proves that by shifting the focus of her imagining, Mrs. M.F. entered physically into where she had persisted in being imaginatively. Soon after our marriage, my husband and I decided that our greatest joint desire was a year in Europe. This objective may seem reasonable to a lot of people, but to us, tied to a narrow sphere of limited finances, it seemed not only unreasonable, but completely ridiculous. Europe might as well have been another planet. But I had heard your teaching, so I persisted in falling asleep in England. Why England necessarily, I cannot tell, except that I had seen a current motion picture featuring the area around Buckingham Palace, and had promptly fallen in love with the scene. All I did in my imagination was to stand quietly outside the great iron gates and feel the cold metal bars gripped tightly in my hands as I viewed the palace. For many, many nights, I felt an intense joy at being there and fell asleep in this happy state. Soon after, my husband met a stranger at a party who, within 1 month, was instrumental in securing a teaching fellowship for him at a great university. Imagine my excitement when I heard the university was in England. And tied to a narrow sphere? Within another month, we were crossing the Atlantic, and our supposedly insurmountable difficulties melted as though they had never existed. We had our year in Europe, one of the happiest years of my life. M.F. What the world looks like depends entirely on where man is when he makes his observations. And man, being all imagination, must be where he is in imagination. The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Psalm 118:22. That stone is imagining. I acquaint you with this secret and leave you to act or react. This is the famous stone that turneth all to gold. For that which God doth touch and own cannot for less be told. George Herbert, The Elixir. My home is old, but it is mine. I wanted the exterior painted and the interior redecorated, yet I had no money to accomplish either objective. You told us to live as though our desire is already a reality. And this I began to do, imagining my old house with a brand new coat of paint, new furnishings, new decoration, and all the trimmings. I walked around, in my imagination, through the newly decorated rooms. I walked around the outside, admiring the fresh paint. And, at the end of my imaginal act, I handed the contractor a check for payment in full. I entered this imaginal scene faithfully, as often as I could during the day and each night before I fell asleep. Within 2 weeks, I received a registered letter from Lloyd's of London, telling me I had inherited $7,000 from a woman I had never met. I had known her brother, slightly, almost 40 years before, and had performed a small service 15 years ago for the lady when this brother had died in our country. And she had written to me asking for particulars regarding his death, which I was able to provide. I had not heard from her since that time. Now, here was the check for $7,000. More than enough to cover the cost of my house restoration, plus many, many other things I desired. ECA. He who does not imagine in stronger and better lineaments, and in stronger and better light than his perishing and mortal eye can see, does not imagine at all. Blake. Unless the individual imagines himself, someone else, or somewhere else, the present conditions and circumstances of his life will continue in being and his problems recur. For all events renew themselves from his constant images. By him they were made. By him they continue in being, and by him they can cease to be. The secret of causation is in the assembled imagery. But a word of warning, the assemblage must have meaning. It must imply something, or it will not form the creative activity, the word. End of chapter.